Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Edheroes Global Forum 2025. And today we have the honor to see the discussions, a very interesting one from the Global University sessions. And the title of today's sessions would be The Future is Here. Who gets to decide what's next? Ooh, that's a spicy topic and spicy title. But before we dig down to what is actually the meaning of the title, let me introduce myself first. My name is Farhanisa Nasution. I'm the expansion director of Edheroes, and it is an honor for me to be the moderator for today's discussions. And today's sessions would be about technology extends far beyond computers and codes. That's exactly the situation that we face today. And it also includes transformative teaching methods and social innovations that reshape society. Because we know 10 years ago, we don't know this technology called online meetings, online classes, but right now we live with that. Like it's a part of our daily life now. And approaches like gamifications or flipped classrooms hold equal significance to digital solutions because modern educations, for example, like project based learning, personalized instructions, and community initiatives like folk schools or perhaps local co-working spaces, demonstrate how progress require interdisciplinary collaborations. Now, the true challenge lies in applying technology thoughtfully because we need to understand how to combat educational inequality while also expanding access to knowledge, right? And ultimately, the future is shaped not only by tech developers, but equally by teachers, sociologists, and community organizers. Everybody has a part, in order to make the education ecosystem better. And authentic technology serves human needs above all. Now, I'm going to introduce our experts for today. The first one is Leah Kiwan Daniel. She's a professor of digital marketing and digital transformations, also the founder of Lemmy and Partners. Hello, Leah. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Great. So good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to
Of
be
course.
present.
The honor is ours. And then moving on to Karim El Laifi, PhD. He's a research associate at Leipzig University, healthcare industry consultant. Hello, Karim. How are you?
Hi everyone. Very excited to be with you.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual. We are so excited to discuss and to get to meet you. And last but not least, we have Philip Sin. He's the co-founder and CEO of PHCL PTE Ltd. Hello, Philip. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for inviting me.
Good, good. So good to have you here. And now, let's just start the conversation because we have a very, very interesting title, because it's about who gets to decide what's next. Now, this is something that is currently an ongoing debate in every country, in every area, in every perspective, and every walks of life. Because this session title asks who gets to decide what's next, especially when it comes to education technology. From your perspective, who currently has the most influence over these decisions and who needs to be better represented in shaping this kind of future? Perhaps we can start from Leah.
Yeah. So currently, from my point of view, actually, and from what I see in academia, I think the big decision makers nowadays are the big tech companies, the startups in tech, so the private sectors in a way. And unfortunately, the educators and academia in general, I don't see a lot of us represented in these kind of, if you want, workshops maybe, or this to have appropriate decisions in this field. I don't feel like really educators are present enough. Maybe they are in some way, but I feel it's not enough. So basically, mainly, these are the private sector actors, startups, investors, big tech companies. This is what I see from my side, at least.
Yeah, this is very interesting because we're talking about education
Mm.
and its relation to technology. And you mentioned that tech company is the bigger player when it comes to shaping the narrative of
Yeah.
education. What about you, Karim? Do you agree with this? And probably you can see from your perspective, your expertise.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would definitely agree with Leah here that major tech companies, leading educational institutions, the big players we call it in the industry, yeah, the big players are setting the trends usually on what's important, what's not, and we are not digging into intentions why they're doing this here, but at the end, yeah, everybody's looking at the mutual benefit or how they see the outcome in their eyes or through their lenses. Yeah, and not to jump into the answer from my perspective now, but definitely, like Leah, I think rightfully said, we are missing the educators, the end users, if we can say, yeah, the science part. Yeah, I mean, again, we are talking about technology and innovation. Where is it? Where is it? Technology providers' contribution. I mean, the new ones, not the existing established ones, but the new ones in this game. So I would definitely agree with Leah here. I think we are perfectly aligned on this. Yeah.
That's interesting. And what about you, Philip? As a strategic parenting advisor, of course, you have a pretty interesting take on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you speak about it from the Singapore perspective, the Ministry of Education here plays a big part, I think, in how things are done across the nation. And they actually have an organization here in Singapore called GovTech, which is part of the government, and they're responsible for also introducing technology into the educational system. We do also have, as Leah and Kareem said, companies in the private sector who are introducing technology as well. But I guess in Singapore, it's pretty well divided into the local school system, and then there's the international school system. And happy to talk more about it. But from my perspective, so the education ministry is really the one driving a lot of the stuff done today, and we do need to see a lot more private sector involvement, I think.
Thank you so much, Philip. It's very interesting to see from this discussion. I mean, the first questions is highlighted who gets to decide what in the next coming futures, and obviously we can see that it requires collaborative efforts not only from the educators, from the institution, but also from the government side as the public policymakers. And we can see that oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes, educators are often as the end users of the new technologies, not the designer or not the shaper, should we say. How can we more meaningfully include teachers and learners as well, because they are also using the technology. They're the one who receives all the benefits, hopefully, right, in the creations and evaluations of educational tools. Perhaps we can start from Philip.
Sure. I think, it's interesting. Educators, in my opinion, are great at what they do, which is educating. And I think it takes a lot more, I think, incentives for teachers to get involved and also the ministries to get involved in terms of coming up with new solutions and so forth. So I do think that we do have to get other, especially the users involved. So when we designed a app for Chinese vocabulary, for instance, the school is still using a very traditional way of learning. And what we tried to do was think about it from the user's perspective. More specifically, in Singapore, it's the English-speaking kids who are trying to memorize Chinese characters and vocabulary. And so we definitely have to get more input from the actual users because they're the ones that really understand the challenges. And I'll stop it there. Yeah.
I totally agree with Philip. So the end user, eventually he's the end user, right? Like the educators are the end users. And currently they are not, like, as we mentioned, all mentioned, they are not involved enough. Maybe in Singapore, maybe a bit more. But what I see from the field here in the UAE or in Paris or in Europe in general, So I feel, yeah, they are not included in these in these, if you want, in these processes to come up with the appropriate tech, even though they are the end users. So just to give you an example, while I was working with a pharmaceutical company in Paris, so I was coming up with a tech platform to the end users were the marketeers, the sales rep, and so on. So basically, we did workshops with these end users, even though we were developing these platforms to include them and to have their opinion of what they need, what features they need, and so on. So this is missing. Maybe the governments are responsible for this to include more, or to, if you want to put them in line with each other. From one side, the private companies and also the universities, the schools. I think it's more the government responsibility to do that. Philip, you mentioned in Singapore they are doing that, so I'm not sure in other countries how they are doing. But from what I see from where I am working currently, sorry, and where I worked before, this is still missing and so much work to be done. And this is maybe an opportunity actually to take it and to go ahead, especially nowadays, because we're in the middle of it, in the middle of the tech evolution with AI, with what's happening. From our side, also as educator, we're facing a lot of challenges. How we're going to adapt to the use of AI. Maybe we're going to talk later on this about this. Sorry. But all of this, how to overcome these challenges, but let us be involved with all of these reflection. Not now when we have the problem, we're trying to see what's the solution. Let us be involved from the beginning, and then we can try to find the solution together. So yeah, this is my perspective. I don't know, maybe Karim, do you have another point of view on that?
I fully agree, but let me claw back to the missing part of science when it comes to decision. What I really mean with it, that when it comes to education, I will not go now into the difference between learning and education. This needs a session per se. But when it comes to cognitive science, the advances in cognitive science today, and now you can, with very basic platforms, you can really measure if the students are learning or not from a different technology. So you can deploy an app today or a learning platform, and you can really measure and assess how much knowledge you're transferring to the brains of these students, even on a pilot examples. And now this is completely missing. So this is only in universities today. This is still an advances in cognitive science. But where is this? Where is this when it comes to develop new technology or deploying new technology or giving feedback for a new technology? So the contribution of the science element is missing in the design part, in the deployment part, or in the assessment part. Yeah. So now, again, to the very first command, it's driven by the tech vendors or educational institutions. They think that this is a nice technology or an innovation tool that brings more to the education outcome. Is there any feedback, actual assessed quantitative feedback on this? This is completely missing. Just back to deciding whether we want to deploy this or not. And I will rest my case here, not to consume more time. Yeah.
It's actually very interesting because we can see from each country has different experiences, different methods, but all we can also see that there are barriers, and then there are some things missing. For example, Karim mentions about the science element, and Leah also mentions about how it's not still seamlessly integrated into the educational system. And but we can also see that real educational transformations, as we are now entering the very, very first phase of it with the coming of AI and everything in the education realm. And we can see that the real transformation comes oftentimes from collaborations across sectors, because we cannot do it alone. We have to, stand together as one, the tech industry, policymakers, education institutional, and of course, community. In your experiences, what are the common barriers, and what makes such collaborations from multi-sectors could actually work?
No, I think my experience in working with different parties is that everybody has got their view of the world, And it's so hard for them to sort of get out of that, what I call funnel, if you will. So when I go talk to universities and I say to them, hey, listen, guys, I got another way of thinking about this. They're like, well, no, we do it traditionally this way. And so if you can't do it this way, it doesn't really work for us, right? And recently I actually had a interesting session with a bunch of therapists. We were talking about, how do we apply sort of new ideas about education into or a way to think about things differently. And they said, well, we love the way you're thinking about it, but that's not how clinicians think about it. And so for me, it's always from that funnel that we take a perspective from, and it's hard to cross over. And so, I encourage participants to think about getting people who are able to sort of go on both sides. And the other thing I've been thinking a lot about, whether it's valid or not, I'm not really sure, but, they're the left brains and the right brain people. And one are really great at feeling and being able to sort of like feel for what the students are going through in terms of challenges. And then you've got the other brain people who are just about the technology and the logic and everything else, the process. And so I think we need to be able to sort of close the two and kind of, overlap them at some stage to come up with very reasonable collaboration. I mean, that's my opinion anyways.
I agree with Philip also. So you mentioned the resistance to change, right? So we're facing that a lot in all sectors, not only in education, but since we're talking about education now. And also I worked with a friend of mine, he's a psychologist, and we're working together on how to deal with this resistance to change in companies or in the education sector also. So how can we do it? What are the processes to do that? What are the techniques to be able to make them wants to adopt these new technologies, wants to and be also, if you want, sure that this technology will help them, and not only an accessory, but really would help them, and it's a tool for them to be more efficient and more effective, right? So we face a lot of changes and resistance nowadays. I'll just give you an example. Also, I worked at some point in the medical sector. Actually, it was my PhD thesis. I was dealing with doctors, and doctors are the first resistant to change. This is just to give you an example. And to be honest, in education, I don't find it that far from that. And a lot of, if you want, it depends on the generation also. This is 100% of the educators from one side, like who wants to adopt these new technologies, and the mentality, and also the culture. Because culturally, every culture and every society has different ways of dealing with technology. Maybe the educators are ready, but maybe the students are not. We have this. Maybe they are not they don't have the tools, the means, or even, if you want, the background to adopt easily this technology. We're facing this also from the students' perspective. So it's important from like the academic perspective to help them adopt the students, and the educators. So it's like the entirety. So if we're talking about universities or schools, to help from one side the educators, and from the other side also the students, to be able to do that, how to use these technology. Because some also, if you can see, students are afraid to say that, okay, I don't know how to use it, or because they will feel that, okay, maybe no, I should know how to use it, So we're facing a lot of these, if you want, issues nowadays and barriers to this adoption. So I think, it's one of the barriers.
So it's difficult to top these two answers now. So I will try to get it from maybe a new angle and I will borrow the vocabulary of Philip and Leah here, that if you have this bunch of the right and the good people, and you want to introduce collaboration and face the resistance, which is natural by human, to make this collaborative spirit from a business perspective, because I think we face this more, day to day in business. I think Philip and Leah will echo this, that you need either to have a well-defined and agreed problem statement, or a unified outcome that we all are aspiring to. And when it comes, to this interdisciplinary teams, usually you have part of this and part of this, but not both. So there is no well-defined problem statement. We are not all trying to solve the same or to solve.
I think you hit it right on the head, Kareem. when you don't have the expertise, I mean, like myself, I'm looking for somebody on the technology side to work with me because, we're talking about AI and then how that's going to affect jobs, for instance, for kids in the future. Now, I'm very comfortable talking about the latter part, but the first part, I'm just not. And then so trying to find somebody who's willing to work with you and say, yeah, let me step over a bit, but respect that you'll focus on that part and vice versa. It's such a hard exercise to get done, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, also I agree with Karim and Philip regarding that, because same thing for me. Like I give you the example of the psychologist, my friend who's a psychologist, who I'm working with him to know how can we face this resistance to change, and how can we also work on the change management part. So yeah, it's like the interdisciplinary concept that we need to really focus on that even more in education and in academia, I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we can see that a lot of resistance happening across sectors, and we need to find the root cause of this. Because apparently, not from the industry, like for example, the the big tech companies, for example, but also from the institutions. Then, and the most interesting thing, the resistance is also found within the students and also the educators. This is also interesting because educators and students, they might have hesitations. I can speak from the experience I have also in Indonesia, because we are the archipelago. So there are different infrastructure within each islands, and we can see that we can actually see this case coming to surface when it comes to COVID-19 2 or 3 years ago, because it highlighted all the gaps that we have. And I still remember one of the students got interviewed on TV, and they need to climb a tree just to get a signal to submit their homeworks. And well, on the other part, we can also see that a lot of students have it in a relatively easier manner than those kids who lives remotely on the remote island, for example. And this also brings us to another barriers or another challenges on how to balance the innovation and inclusion. Because as we push for innovation in education, like for example, we push every students to learn more and familiarize themselves with AI, for example. But on the other hand, we also have students that lives in the underdeserved communities, for example. How can we ensure that progress doesn't unintentionally widen the existing inequalities, especially for those who lived in the underdeserved communities, and that access goes beyond just connectivity and devices to include cultural relevance? Because Leah also mentions about cultural hesitations, right, and resistance, and how to make it contextually fit and meaningful learning outcomes.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting. I was just dropping my daughter off today for one of her tutorial sessions, and we talked about this. And I said, listen, I'm doing this session, and we're talking about adopting technology to learning. And I said, what are your thoughts if I were to say to you, we have this app that's going to be very helpful? And she said to me, well, Dad, I got to find it interesting. And so from my perspective, coming from a country like Singapore, we got all the access. The problem is getting them interested. And then I said, well, yeah, what if we gamify it? Can we make it into a game? And she goes, well, but then I've got other games I like to play more. And so for me, I think, we go back to what Kareem earlier said about cognitive science, right? We got to understand how the brain works and what makes kids interested to learn. And the other thing I'm working a lot on right now is the understanding of different levels of aptitude and also people's interests in a certain area of study. Because if you don't have those two things to start with, it's kind of hard to get kids started on doing anything, especially when you're delivering it via digital and there's nobody there to sort of push the kids. So that's just my initial thoughts about this.
From my perspective, also we definitely need to take into account the co-creation. because co-creating, this is what will help diminish the inequalities. So co-creating and identifying the needs for every culture, for every society, for every, let's say, university, every school. So this would help us minimize this, because if we have one, let's say, one technology or one system that is like used or presented to everyone in the same way, maybe like you mentioned, there will be differences. There will be like some cultures, some society that will adopt it, others no, because maybe they don't have the they don't have the training, they don't have the access also. So co-creating and personalization, this what will minimize all of these gaps from my point of view.
That's interesting because the gaps is actually there, and it's quite wide, but we have to pay attention on how to closer the gap and to eventually erase it. Make it go away. And yeah, this is something that needs to be discussed more. And Karim, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think like the team has already mentioned, you have the problem of the axis and what we also in neuroscience call the cognitive axis. So it's not the availability of the tool, but how you perceive the tool. Yeah, and we have seen this a lot in healthcare in well-established products that you have different regions or communities. They all have the product, but the outcome that you get from this medical or imaging product is completely diversified. Sometimes change from 0 to 100. And this is not just about, training is definitely one part, educating on how to use the tools is something, but how they are culturally and as a community perceived. And I think this takes us back to the very first comment on who decides. Do we have cultural leadership part of the deployment of these tools into, even in the design part, into the design and the deployment of these tools into these communities? Do we have, I'll give you a very simple example that we have seen a lot when it comes to user interface and software. For communities in Africa, they perceive red, green, and yellow completely different from the people in Germany, for example. Red means dangerous in Germany, it means something else in Africa. For nothing, but just it's a cultural perception, and so on and so on. So such minor details, I believe they are minor, but the impact of such details on how you are including people, the inclusion, and you are really enabling the access to the outcome is completely different. And if this is missing from the design part, the impact on the outcome is sometimes 10 times amplified.
Yeah, Karim, this is also very interesting aspect to be highlighted, because most of the time people will react negatively or will refuse to understand more about something new because they don't see it as a fit. They don't see it as familiar as the way they used to do their life or do things before. And this relates heavily within the cultural aspect, the cultural perceptions of it, which leads us to think that usually when it comes to implementing something, especially tools in education and technology, those things are usually designed to connect with people globally without the comprehensive aspect or understanding about the realities that happen locally within each countries. That is, really different. What works in Indonesia, for example, could be different in Singapore, like Karim mentioned, would be different in Germany and Africa and UAE, for example. How do we make sure global innovation respects and adapts to local educational needs and values? Because this is very, 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 very wide world. We have our own reality, like we can get to meet people face to face, but we cannot deny that the digital life is also a part of our daily life now. We see people in social medias, in applications, that sort of thing. So what do you think about this, Karim?
Okay, so I think there are multi answers for this. It's very critical, and I think it's also very challenging. So, without echoing and repeating what we have already all discussed about the cultural leadership, cultural surveys, and sometimes you need something they call it neurocultural calibration. So it's not just you calibrate culture, but also as we said, the cognitive axis and neural part. But I think when it comes to policymakers and government, and I think this would echo with Philip as strategy leader as well, that you are missing the standardization here. So because aiming at a global, something that we call global, but it needs to be, I wouldn't say localized, but uh, uh, copied to different communities and culture, there should be a minimum accepted standard. We see this in every industry. We see this in healthcare. We see this in manufacturing. You see this everywhere. When it comes to the education in general and education technology, you are missing a minimum standard that can be accepted everywhere, or at least aimed and aspired everywhere. So I think the neuroculture part, the standardization part, might be a starting point into uh, addressing this global versus local barrier.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Karim. And Philip, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very specific example that we had when we were looking at the Chinese app, the language vocabulary app. We looked around the world, and there were tons of apps out there for Chinese language, no shortage, right? Then we asked ourselves, how is Singapore different, right? And we realized that Singapore, it's one of the very few countries that require a Chinese kid or Chinese, ethnic kid here in Singapore to actually take mother tongue, which is Mandarin, as part of the curriculum. Now, most other places, if they require you to do a language like that, it might be more voluntary. So kids generally are more driven to do those kind of courses. Whereas in Singapore, you're asked to, well, you're not asked, you're required to do it. So we had to approach it differently and kind of say, well, these apps actually don't work because it might work with general vocabulary. It might help with, sort of cognitively understanding what a word means. But in Singapore context, you've got to actually read and write and pass an exam. So we took whatever they had to do globally and kind of said, we got to adjust it, first of all, for the Singapore MOE curriculum. And then we had to sit down and say, well, now it's a requirement, not option. And you got to pass an exam. So I would say that there's a lot of localization to what's required. And so that's how I think about these things. You take what's global applicably, and then you kind of like drive it down to what's needed in your local community.
Very interesting. Go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, to like add on that also, I'll give an example about the CRM and ERP systems. So when we want to adopt a new CRM system or a new ERP system, the first thing that we look at is the systems that are present and see how we can adopt it to our own companies, our own needs. So basically, it's the same thing. When we have a new technology or a new platform that we want to adopt or to our university or school, so basically we're gonna see what's out there and see how we can adopt it. So basically, it's a standardized process at the beginning, but how to personalize it and shape it for this specific community. So in the case of the CRM and ERP systems, so that's why nowadays we have a modular systems, or platform modulars. So basically you choose what you want, right? Based on what you need. So you choose first, you have the right to choose. It's all out there for everyone, but you choose based on your needs and the features, the modules that you want, and so on. So basically, I think having these kind of technologies that are adaptable from one side, like one size fits all, but in the same time, you can take what you need and personalize it for your own needs. So I think both, and this way we can really have the needs of all of the communities out there, and they have the right to choose what they need from another side. So yeah.
And that's the beauty of IT, or in this case, technology, to be able to leverage it out and customize very quickly and hopefully relatively cheaply.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because we see making a tailored approach or tailored, let's say, policy or features when it comes to technology is not as hard as if we do it like 10 or 15
Yes.
years ago, where everything we sort of do that manually. But with technology, we get actually a lot of help in terms of efficiency, in terms of how to do it in a more detailed manner, because we can see every little aspects, because we have the data, right? The data is actually something that is very valuable when it comes to uh, integrations of education and technology. And speaking about data, whether it's data use, we have also AI, the use of AI that's currently almost, I'm not saying it's on the peak yet, but it keeps on rising. The amount of students, the teachers that's using AI on their day-to-day teaching classrooms and everything, and also automations in classrooms that's happening globally. Ethical concerns are also growing with this part. We saw a lot of false informations, for example, and that leads to false knowledge. And yeah, then it's not a small amounts, it's actually everywhere. How do we move from abstract ethical principles that's, sometimes we tend to understand the situation when we see something, a post about, let's say, people who beat up their pets, but also we can see it from another post that this is not the right thing to do. We need to pay attention more to, for example, how do local governments regulate their policy when it comes to this aspect. But it's some sort of abstract. We have double standards because of these things. How do we move from those abstract principles to concrete safeguards in education and technology design, and also the implementation of it?
I think, coming from a private sector, I'm a believer that incentives drive behavior. So if you don't put the right incentive in place, you're going to have all kinds of problems, right? When you have a private sector entity, coming in with a new program and their objective is to maximize profit, their view of the world is going to be very different. It's going to be incentivized by, well, can I sell my data off? Can I, use it in other forms to generate more revenue for the company? It's a complicated one, but I think, as policymakers, we have to be very careful about incentivizing correctly whatever technology we want to use.
Yeah. Leah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I want to add regarding the data and specifically. So if you think about it, so all the regulations that now exist, the GDPR and others that are really specific for each country, these regulations don't date from long time ago. So let's talk specifically about the GDPR. So it's the European Regulation for Data Protection. It was introduced in 2018, which is not that long time ago. So why am I mentioning this? Because if you think about it, 2018, so again, it's not long time ago, and now it's evolving. So basically we start protecting data couple of years back, and now more and more we're pushing for these data protection. How many scandals we're hearing about data protection nowadays? Every week we hear something new. And because technology and AI is evolving on a weekly basis, on a daily basis actually, these also data protection regulations are evolving. From the academic perspective, we also have critical data, right? So, and governments have the role of protecting these data and keep up with the change. Where are we going? I guess no one knows because every day is different. From our perspective, educators' perspective, we really need to make sure that we're introducing the ethical perspective to our students also. So just to give you an example regarding that. Of course, we know that students nowadays are using a lot AI, specifically ChatGPT, for example, right? So they are using it for exams, for their assignments, and all of this. From our perspective, it's a huge topic on how to deal with this issue. Like all the universities, all schools are facing the same issue. How can we deal with this? How can we make sure that the students are using it in the right way, right? But are they doing that? Are they listening to us? But if you think about it, I tell my students, okay, you know that ChatGPT is based on an open source. So basically, some of the data can be wrong. Some of the references even can be wrong, right? So we see that references are, if we check it sometimes, some references, if we really verify, these are wrong references that doesn't even exist. So we're trying to push students to if you're going to use it, let's say, tell us that you used it. Why did you use it? From what perspective did you use it? Right? And from our side, educators' side and academic side, we're trying as much as possible to be, if you want to make our assignment, exams, and all of these tests to be as reflective as possible, to make them even have their own input in what they are doing, right? So I think it's a really interesting question, and we're trying to dig in deeper into that. So the academic, if you want, bodies all over like the world are trying to see, okay, what can we do? Governments are trying to do that, but also as educators, we can start from our side in our classrooms to have step by step, if you want, process to make sure we're creating this awareness.
Yeah, it might be seen as a little step, but it is actually something very valuable because we are practicing ethics when it comes to regulate the right and the wrong when in the sea of tons of informations that's available online, for example. And yeah, Karim, what do you think? What are you saying on this?
No, I mean, definitely, I agree with both here. And I think what Leah mentioned, which is they call it the bias when it comes to results of certain technologies like LLM models, but actually there's a deeper concern when it comes to AI tools, which is the cognitive bias in the training. Yeah, because this is completely not audited. Yeah, so, and I'm not talking about specific tool today, but in general, any AI model just generated on a bunch of data, not the results part, but the generation of the model. There is no audit whatsoever on which data has been used to generate this model extra. Yeah, so I think we need to go two steps back, that ethics and sociology, and let me highlight sociology here. It needs to be an integral, not complementary, integral and mandatory part when it comes to the design of any educational tools. We are talking about our kids and the future generations. We need to be at least sure that these are neutral, there is no cognitive bias in this. So this first part. The second part, which Leah and Philip already mentioned, the results part. Yeah, if there is a bias in the results part, who is auditing this? Yeah, there is no standard, there is no measurement. And what we all learned in business, if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. End of story. Yeah, so if there is no audit or real clear safeguards and policies, yeah, that within the education we need to stay within these limits and delimiters, you will always have this ethics question as an open one without even a minimum accepted level of ethics introduced in this. Yeah, and this it's not just one cycle from design to product or from design to deployment. This needs to be a very continuous process, like we are doing today in healthcare and other industries. Yeah, I mean, there is always an audit on who is delivering what to whom. Why this is not part of the education technology specifically. So if these three arms, I think, so the early intervention of ethics and sociology, avoiding the cognitive bias when it comes to the generation of the technology, and the continuous audit and assessment.
This is actually very interesting points, Karim, because we're still in the early stage of integrating these whole systems. So it's not too late to, just to approach new everything in the new ways. And I've been told that we only have several minutes left. So to wrap this discussion, which is a very interesting one, the title is "The Future is Here. Who gets to decide what's next?" It's the big questions that that sums the discussions. But by the end of the sessions, I think we can agree that we still have the chance to gets to decide what's next, because by treating the integrations of technology and education as how we learn to live to do our everything in our own life before. For example, we can learn how to socialize from scratch. We can learn how to think within the digital realm when it comes to education. And it includes how to shape the mindsets of the students, the teachers, the educators, the policymakers. We can learn also how to walk the talk when it comes to integrating these two sectors. And one of the most important thing as well is we can learn how to absorb informations that's available online, and together we can do it across sectors. We can do it together, the educators, students, communities, policymakers, to break down the barriers that's happening, that's raising, and it's a long work, but it's not impossible. So yeah, I think your expertise, Philip, Karim, Leah, opens our eyes on how to be more mindful when it comes to treating these educations and technologies intersections everywhere, and hopefully your expertise, your experiences could also help all of our audiences here. And it's very, very interesting discussions, of fruitful ones, I must say. So thank you so much once again, Philip, Leah, and Karim, for your time and your insights. And it's an honor for us to have you at the Adheroes Global Forum 2025. I'm Farhaniza, and see you in the next year's Global Forum, everyone. Bye.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you so
Thank you.
much.